Hello, Gravitrons. I'm More Gravity. Let's play chess. Okay. Yes. 94 and 83. This is a very strong and accurate game. Let's play this game out to checkmate. Alright. Even more accurate with the ending. I guess the computer. No, okay. Wait, which way was that? Yes, more accurate. We'll go through this game. Just let it be known that my opponent resigned after move 37. So let's review. Or go over. C5 on move 2 sometimes helps black control the center. Central development, central pawn. Occupancy of the center with central pawns is good. And with queen a5, I expected knight to c3, knight to 3, queen a5 check. I expected knight to c3, and that's what occurred. It was the best move. Just making a strong pawn chain towards d5 and including d5 with the move e6. Like I've said, now that my bishop is outside the same color square pawn chain, it's almost as good as a good bishop. So this bishop is now made stronger by having moved to f5, and then I played e6. The bishop's back here on c8, but let's say instead my knight was developed. But the bishop here on c8 has not that clear a future, at least not in the short term. So outside the pawn chain, then we close the pawn chain. That makes way for the dark squared bishop, and black is on his way. A number of these squares will work. D6 often works with the queen here, but not in this case. So let's move on from there. Knight to e5. It's a challenging central move by my opponent's knight. I can't answer it immediately in the most direct way by capturing because of the pin. So my strategy to deal with that was to ignore that. With the knight pinned, I can capture on b5. In some variations, for instance, castles looks like a normal and natural move. Get out of the way of the pin. No, okay, not for instance castles. I take that back. The knight's pinned, right? Certain moves I can just. What would be a move that actually makes sense all the while? I don't know. Maybe my opponent played bishop to g3. I can capture on b5 to exploit the pin, right? So my opponent wants to liquidate instead of that and gets, I think, a pawn out of the deal here, right? The problem is, I can, even in this variation, I'm best to push through. The check on my opponent's king is stronger even than my opponent's attack on my queen at a5. So black need not worry about losing his queen right away. In fact, depending on how white responds, there's material in it in black's favor. White might sometimes capture with the b pawn. Instead, my opponent found, I think, a superior move. But b pawn is second after bishop to d2. So that would be one thing. And then if it were with the b pawn, just follow up, capture on c2, and that's also check. Black's queen will have a number of choices of piece to capture at that point. Probably the rook on a1 makes the most sense. Rook takes a1 check, and white has to recover again with his queen, or I don't know. Queen takes c6 is also a good option here. Get this knight away from our half of the board where it can sometimes cause a lot of damage. So bishop to d2, then plowing through. Simple trades. But black is ahead a full 2 pawns. It's actually by way of a bishop and a pawn for 2 pawns, and that puts black ahead by 2 points worth of material. The progress bar here shows that there's dynamic factors, other factors of the position, that put black ahead by another pawn and a half approximately. Developing the knight. Remember, trades are good. If my opponent initiates a trade on e7, I've sort of earned a point of initiative and allowed 2 pieces to trade out. That's good for black, because black has the material advantage. Exactly. My opponent takes up this scary post on e5. I start thinking I have to deal with this post correctly. I thought the best thing to do is just get it out of there as soon as possible. With f6, that knight will flee. See, and my king, I chose king f7. I think oftentimes in the past I might have castled kingside, just kind of like, oh good, now I got my castle. But think about it. King f7, look, white's king is active. There are no queens on the board. Most of the minor pieces are gone. King to f7, you have to think, how might my opponent attack me if? And that's on g5 with a check and on e5 with a check. Both of those are covered, and covered strongly by a pawn that's protected. So I'm not as worried about king f7. Now, it's not a huge, like, game-changing, set your hair on fire kind of situation. I could have captured I could have castled kingside and still had connected rooks. My king would be safe on g8, but just on f7, he's quicker. He's quicker to the milieu, if you will. There's a protection on the pawn at e6, and a possible route to become even more involved by way of king to g6. This was the best move. C3 gets ahead of the game, where black might otherwise attack the pawn while it was on c2 with some amount of force behind it. It's a strengthening move. It's good for white's pawn structure. I played g5. I want to reduce the options available to white's knight on f3. So I want to take control of the h4 square, and of the 2 ways to do that on that move, I found pawn to g5 the best. Kind of in this zone where Okay, so the knight's blocked from moving to d4. And we're controlling e5 and g5. What can we do to make this knight a where he is and back knight? I don't want the knight to be encroaching into our half of the board, into black's half of the board. So g5 controls the h4 square, at least for the moment. There's all kinds of ways white can break this up. Probably h4 is a good one. h4, there we go, just like we said. And then kind of looking for something dynamic. I'll trade bishop for knight, no doubt about it. If that means I'll trade bishop for knight and double white's f pawns, yes, then very much so. That's what I'll do. And like I said, a there and back kind of knight. Here he is all huddled up on e1, blocking communication between his rooks. He's doing at best there to push, to help aid the push of a pawn that doesn't need to be aided. He can develop to d3, but not without black competing his aims of trading minor pieces on d3. Same thing goes for c2. This knight is doing a fine job of protecting g2, and that's it. h5 is the way to get a pawn rush going. f3. White wants to kick back the bishop in a way that allows for maybe some counterplay against the oncoming kingside pawn rush. Excuse me there. Kingside pawn rush. Bishop to f5. It's the best placement for the bishop. And then we're trading 2 pawns for 1. Thank you very much. And soon enough, black is breaking through the position. The white's position is crumbling, not all in one go, but crumbling. We take with every move by black here, we're levying some kind of threat. Here, the threat is to exchange minor pieces on d3. You know, a moment ago, the threat was to push the h-pawn farther and further. I want you to think about that. Those of you grammarians, why both farther and further? That h-pawn is on its way. Rook h8 is just the most efficient way of positioning black's pieces in order to support a rush towards promotion on h1. Knight g6, challenging again to trade material. Notice that any trades initiated by white end up even after all the trades have been made. White cannot afford that and let black have the only piece on the board with enough pawns to make it a done deal. Pawn to h3, promotion coming closer. Pawn to h2, promotion coming closer, and the rook's under attack. That rook is going to move. Moves to the best square. Had it miles ago when I was checking out what kind of square my bishop was seated on. Bishop to e4, hitting at the h1 square, and in some fashion, I'd say black's going to go ahead by at least the exchange here in just these next few moves. Knight g3, a good try. Try to attack the bishop and protect the rook, and now soon enough, it's over. There's too much. White's position has collapsed. Get the queen on the board via an exchange sacrifice, if you want to call it that, and then pawn to a1, queens and checkmates. that's it. I was very glad this game was very accurate, interesting. I thought my opponent played very well. So that's that. And I was broadcasting. Good. I got it all. I didn't mess up on the broadcast button or the streaming button. So, thank you all for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.